Welcome to the Onside CFL Fantasy Football Podcast, Episode 2. Bringing it in, Lower Your Weapons by Revolution Engine, the official band of producer Ben Bussey. You can find their music at revolutionenginemusic.com. Episode 2, 1 week away from training camp already. Dan the Stats Guy. Here we go again.
Yeah, here we go. And, this week it's, you're seeing the tweets, you're seeing word from guys around the league. They're ready to start training camp. And next week, I guess, right after the weekend, everybody's going to be ready for football in more ways than one.
We talked about excitement level of you and I last week. One guy we didn't talk about, and he actually hasn't slept a wink since our last podcast, is our fine producer, Ben Bussey. And we're very happy to have him along and the brains that he brings to this podcast. And one other big announcement, aside from the fact that Ben is on our podcast, we got a huge announcement tonight that people have been asking about for weeks about the future of our website. And Dan, we're officially happy to say we got a green light.
Fantaseh.ca is back in business for the 2016 season. Lots of questions over the last 3 or 4 months, I guess, to our account, of people wondering whether or not the Fantaseh website's going to be going, where they're going to be getting their fantasy football fix from the CFL. But exciting news that they're going to be back on board for the 2016 season.
We've had a lot of tweets, a lot of questions, which you can continue to please fire us more tweets. And as we have been the last 3 years, we've been big supporters of the Fantaseh.ca and their product. You can follow us at CFL Fantasy FTB. Send me your starts and ads and all those kind of questions. But some of the big questions that we have had, and there will continue to be as training camps do begin this weekend, are positional battles, as we've talked about last week. And Dan the Stats Guy, you alluded to in BC, there's a couple of big ones. We'll get right into it.
Yeah, we'll start right with BC, start west, moving to the east. And obviously the big one is going to be right in their backfield. Two of the biggest positions on the field, obviously. Jonathan Jennings has already been told by Wally Buono he's going to be the starter. But Travis Lulay, he wants to come back and see if he can get back to that same level. He'll be pushing Jennings in training camp. I think you would agree.
Travis Lulay is the guy finally got healthy last year. He came back. He had a great start. Everybody was so excited and thought, okay, maybe Travis Lulay, the guy is finally here. He's finally back to it. But the book on him has been, since his shoulder problems, can he throw the deep ball anymore? And could that be one of the reasons why we might see his demise?
Well, and we talked about it last week. On the flip side, Jonathan Jennings basically saved the season, the 2015 season, for the BC Lions. So he's going to be given the first opportunity there, but it's always good to have a veteran guy. When Lulay was a younger quarterback, Kevin Glenn was there. Teams like having that veteran presence, and I know for a guy like Jennings, they believe in him, so much so that the other big news of this week, former Oregon Ducks quarterback Vernon Adams, who BC had on their negotiation list, they trade him to the Montreal Alouettes for a first-round draft pick in the 2017 CFL draft. And who knows how good the Alouettes are going to be. That could be the first overall pick. And sure enough, that is Wally's way of showing Jonathan Jennings, we're going to be right behind you. And you move on in the backfield, and you have that running back, battle that's going to be going on at training camp. Two veteran guys, Jeremiah Johnson and Anthony Allen. What are your thoughts, Dave?
Jeremiah Johnson is your Andrew Harris, 2K. He's the prototype of Andrew Harris when he's healthy. He gets your garbage yards at your red zone touchdowns. He's a guy who attacks the line of scrimmage. He's aggressive. He can make cuts and he can make people miss. I think he's the exact same player as Andrew Harris, bringing him in. And Anthony Allen, he didn't really, I would say, have a fair shake in Regina last year because of Jerome Messam and his ability to eat up yards, not to mention that he's a national running back. And it really looked like he got into the doghouse of the coaching staff, and it was a healthy scratch at a number of levels. And you bet he could not wait, to get out of Saskatchewan. But Anthony Allen is a guy, he kind of reminds me of Joe Smith, those of you longtime CFL fans and would remember Joe Smith as a running back in BC with his skill set. And I know, Dan the Stats Guy, you're chalking that up right now going, don't compare guys to other guys, because CFL players hate it when you do that.
Well, and one of the things with Anthony Allen, I think that, Joe Smith's one comparison, but from a stats perspective and from a fantasy perspective, Anthony Allen, regardless of whether he wins the number one job or either one of these guys, I see Jeremiah Johnson getting a lot of receiving yards. And I see Anthony Allen, I think, maybe as that red zone guy, maybe that short yardage guy that Wally Buono brings in for those tougher yards. He's a little bit more of a bull coming out of the backfield. And I think there'll be a place for both guys in this BC Lions offense this season.
Where there will be a place for is defensive ends, and what a battle the Lions do have. Lots of turnover in the offseason. Alex Bazzi, Craig Rowe, and save big money with Menard. He's also Canadian.
Yeah, David Menard, and that's a guy that I'm really excited to kind of see what he's going to do next season, or this coming season, because Menard kind of quietly last year put up 6 sacks in sort of a backup role for the Lions on the defense. And if they can get him as a Canadian to start at that side, whether it's Westerman or whoever else also is starting along the line, that gives them a whole lot more flexibility maybe at the receiver position or in their defensive backfield. Because one other player that really needs to be considered with that BC Lions defense that potentially could come in on some plays, and it's a guy I know you're excited about, that he could come in on defensive end, wait his time at linebacker, but that's Bo Lacombo.
Bo Lacombo is a guy that I think could turn some heads for the BC Lions, definitely, and there's going to be a big battle at defensive end. I think for the most part, Alex Bazzi, when you look at him and his skill set that he did bring to the team last year, he did drop off at the start of the year, but kind of came strong at the end. So I think, if anything, in the BC Lions, that's a battle you're going to want to watch through training camp as you look at the Sam linebacker, Brandon Stewart, and Mike Edom. Mike Edom is a guy in Montreal everyone is excited to have on their fantasy team 2 seasons ago. Kind of just really fell off onto the wayside with the depth the Montreal Alouettes have. Now he's a BC Lion battling with Brandon Stewart, the career journeyman.
Yeah, and throwing also Lacombo's name into that mix, because obviously in that linebacking crew with BC, Adam Bighill's not going anywhere. Solomon Elomimian, maybe a little bit of a question mark with his Achilles injury that he's coming back with. But Lacombo is going to get on the field also as a sort of a Sam linebacker. I don't think BC sees him so much as a guy that's going to be able to do much in coverage because of his size as a traditional linebacker. And that's where a guy like Brandon Stewart, who's been around the league, and Mike Edom as a Canadian have an opportunity there to maybe make some noise, in addition to a host of defensive backs that Wally Buono has brought in this season. One that we thought was going to be a training camp battle, but obviously isn't going to be anymore, is the expected re-signing of Stephen Clark. A big name for the Lions last year. He goes to the NFL, gets cut, and it appears he's on his way back to Vancouver.
And Eric Fraser and Mike Edom battling for the safety position. A long time safety in the CFL, Eric Fraser, and Mike Edom has seen some experience there too as we round out the battles in BC. Moving over to Calgary, an interesting one at defensive end with some turnover with Freddie Bishop no longer there, as well as DeQuinn Evans has headed to the other side of the country. Frank Beltre, Brandon Boudreau, and Josh Franco looking at the bookends for Calgary.
Yeah, well, Josh Francis, Marcus Thompson, Ridge Wilson, 3 rookies that Calgary's brought in. John Hufnagel has done his homework on these guys. 3 unbelievable talents at defensive line that the Stampeders have. Right now it appears as though it's Beltre's job to lose, but don't be surprised if one of these young rookies comes in and makes some noise. The Stampeders, that's one place that we talked, I think, in the previous podcast was about the Stampeders and the turnover on their defense. And you're seeing some of these young guys that they're signing coming and getting into play. And moving on to the defensive tackle position, Junior Turner is obviously a guy that's been around for a number of years. Quinn Smith, also a Canadian at that opposite defensive tackle position. It looks like the Stamps are going to be moving Quinn Smith to the offensive line permanently. At least that's the word coming out of Calgary. So there might be an opportunity for a guy like Derek Wigan, and don't forget about Micah Johnson.
Yeah, Micah Johnson is definitely a guy on the interior who has seen some injury bug over the past couple of years, but coming back will be a force for the Stamps and a guy who can put at some points for your fantasy team as well. On the Sam linebacker spot, Joe Burnett, Keontae Evans, and Malik Harris. And Joe Burnett is a guy that he's well liked in fantasy football over the past couple of years.
Yeah, Burnett, he's a guy that you can kind of move all over the field. Previously with Edmonton, and a guy that's returned kicks in his career in the CFL. Keontae Evans is a guy that I think got into a couple games last season. Same way with Malachi Harris. With the Stampeders, they're, again, turnover here. A guy that's been around the team for, I think, about 7 or 8 years here in Keon Raymond, looking to replace that force. It's not going to be the easiest job for whoever fills his shoes.
We're looking at the defensive back battle in Edmonton. Obviously, Aaron Grimes is out. There's a lot of turnover in the defensive backfield. I'm not sure. I'm honestly looking at that Edmonton backfield and wondering, you put a Mike Benavides defensive coordinator in there, and you wonder if there's going to be drop-off. Are you anticipating anything of that magnitude this season?
I'm not necessarily. I know for especially the last 2 seasons, there's been relatively the same group. John Ojo joins last year and just seems to just come in there seamlessly. And this year, there's not a whole lot of guys that have officially signed yet. I expect the Eskimos closer to training camp in the next couple days prior to the weekend potentially to name some names. But one guy to keep in mind is Dion Ballou, someone who's been in that Edmonton organization and maybe now will have an opportunity to start. But otherwise, it's going to be kind of a who's coming to figure out that Edmonton halfback position and also the strong side linebacker replacing Otha Foster.
Fantasy football note, take notice right now, and I know that there's a lot of Fantaseh.ca players in Saskatchewan who load up on Saskatchewan defensive backs anyway. You are going to love loading up on Saskatchewan defensive backs this year because there's going to be a lot of picks, a lot of tackles. And you look at the battle at safety, there's a cornerback battle between Curtis Brown and Marte Sears. And I think that, in the grander scheme of things, that's lesser of the importance of the battle at safety between 3 Canadians.
Yeah, Matt Webster, Greg Newman, Dan West, 3 veteran players, 3 guys that have been around the Saskatchewan Roughriders organization. And obviously Greg Newman as the hometown or home province guy that comes back from Winnipeg, he has an opportunity to start there. And I think a lot of people are hopeful that he can move from pretty much his entire career as more of a special teams guy into a starting position. And Webster last year obviously started some games. And going back to that corner position, Marte Sears is an interesting name because he's a big guy, 6'4", and many people will recognize that name. Shop at Sears. Well, Johnny Sears of the Hamilton Tiger Cats is his older brother. So he's someone that's been around the league and maybe can give him some tips on how to cover guys and make your way up north of the border.
That's why we have Dan, the stats guy, on the podcast, picks out the little things. Well, we look at the battle in Winnipeg as receivers. Not a whole lot of room for an extra receiver on that unit with the additions they made this year, which need no extra explanation coming from Saskatchewan fans. But Justin Veltung, Julian Fioligadino, and Addison Richards. Addison Richards is a guy that, with good size and good hands and had an exciting CIS career, very likely could draw a factor in there too.
With the Bombers, a guy like Addison Richards or one of the other Canadians could really give the Bombers a lot of Canadian ratio versatility. Obviously, right now they have Andrew Harris as a starting running back, and that's a ratio buster right there. And Jamal Westerman on the D-line, a ratio buster. And so the more Canadians you can have starting a team like Winnipeg, it just allows them to really strengthen their defense, something that might be a question mark. So watch for that. Veltung's a guy that was with the team last year, filled in for Nick Moore at the slot back position and returned some kicks. And obviously, with the deletion of Troy Studemeyer, Veltung could be in place for a full-time roster position.
Defensive end Darrell Johnson is a guy that the Bombers were excited about last year. And Adrian Hubbard, which most fantasy football and CFL players know little about, so enlighten us.
Yeah, Adrian Hubbard, obviously, the one thing that you look at when you see his name is the college that he played at, Alabama Crimson Tide. So he comes from a big-name institution. He's a big, strong, powerful guy, and I think that he'll really push for it. Darrell Johnson, maybe a little bit more of a tweener guy, a guy that has played some linebacker for the Bombers, but there might be an opportunity for him to move down to the line and play a role maybe like a Aaron Laverius or other guys in the league that can play both defensive end and linebacker.
And an exciting middle linebacker battle, one of the probably most exciting battles when it comes to incumbents in the league. Ian Wild and Sam Hurl. One's got a passport, the other one's a sure tackler.
And Sam Hurl obviously was the starter last season as Ian Wild made his way to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Wild came back but didn't get back his starting position. So with the signing of Andrew Harris, maybe that frees up a starting position for an American. And I foresee it in my mind at least, the Bombers going back to Ian Wild and Sam Hurl playing a little bit more of a backup / special teams role for them.
And look at the halfback. You got Julian Posey, Jonte Green, and Justin Green. Can never have too much green, I guess, with they added Weston Dressler and Ryan Smith. Bad joke. Horrible pun intended.
But you know what? And I think when you look at that, that's replacing the departed DeMond Washington, who made his way to Hamilton in the offseason. The Bombers, I think, are looking for a similar type player, an athletic guy that can be all over the field in that halfback position.
Defensive tackle for the Hamilton Ticats moving out east, Lyndon Gaydosh and Michael Atkinson. Lyndon Gaydosh, former first overall pick in the Canadian college draft.
Yeah, Gaydosh is a guy that the Ticats took and had to wait some time for him to come in, and he played sparingly last year, and they've also signed a couple of Americans in Terry Redden and Troy Davis that potentially, and not the Troy Davis that everyone remembers from the Ticats from years ago. No, he's not moving to defensive tackle, but a different player. And so there's some question there of whether the Ticats go with a Canadian next to Ted Laurent in that tackle position or whether they do start an American.
At the Sam linebacker position, Johnny Sears, a guy that the Ticats have been excited about. He very easily, as you and I both would have agreed, had he stayed healthy, could have been up there in picks last year. Rico Murray, we're questionable about his future as he battles with Charles Clay for the Sam linebacker position.
And this is one replacing Eric Harris, who obviously has moved on to the NFL with the New Orleans Saints. And I can see where this and the cornerback position for the Ticats, Sears or Murray, both guys have played all around the secondary and in that strong side linebacker position in the Sam linebacker spot. Maybe one goes in one spot and one goes the other spot, but nothing official from the Ticats yet as to who will be starting at each of those positions.
The last line of defense, this guy came on the field last year in Craig Butler's absence from an injury. Boy, did he ever make some people turn their heads. Mike Daly, and we have high hopes for him heading to the 2016 fantasy season as he battles with Jay Langa for the starting safety spot.
Yeah, I think some people with Mike Daly see it as a huge step down for the Ticats, but don't sleep on Daly, and also don't sleep on if something were to happen to him, his backup, Jay Langa, a guy they drafted last year. The Ticats have high hopes for him. They've moved him around all over the field, both as a linebacker and a safety. They want to see what his skill set is. So the Ticats, that's something we've grown accustomed from Kent Austin's group, is there's always going to be depth. There's always going to be guys coming up to fill in those places, and 2016 is no exception for them.
Moving to the Toronto Argos, proverbial eye roll coming. Starting slot back, Andre Dury, Anthony Koobs, and Devin Wiley. Those longtime fantasy football players know. As soon as you mention the name Andre Dury, what do they think?
They think injuries, and right now, Andre Dury is kind of getting into that late point in his career. He's got that Canadian passport that allows him to stay, I guess, year after year after year through these injuries, and Anthony Coombs is just waiting for the opportunity to start. Coombs could break out this year if given the opportunity, but I think Dury will have the chance to start. And the third name you mentioned there, Devin Wiley. Fans of the NFL will know Wiley from his Kansas City Chief days. He's going to be a guy that they've brought in. They've got about 4 or 5, I believe, receivers coming to camp this year that are CFL rookies that could win a spot. Watch that training camp battle in Toronto. Derek Rogers, a guy that's played in the NFL. Shane Williams-Rhodes, a guy they signed this past week. Christian Jones, Markeith Ambles. They're going to try to make some competition there amongst their entire receiving group. So Toronto's offense could have a different look. Keep an eye on that in the preseason.
Let's not forget about another slot back, Deontay Spencer. They made a name later in the year, but they do like to run that 3 slot back system sometimes in the Toronto offense. And the defensive end, 2 names you'll know right away, and a couple you're not familiar with. That's what we got down the stats guy on the show. I'm just the host. He's a smart guy. Justin Hickman coming over from the Hamilton Ticats. Martin Wright and Trevardo Williams and Paul Hazel, a couple of names Fairweather fans won't be too familiar with.
Well, and Justin Hickman is a household name. Comes over down the 401 from Hamilton, a veteran guy. Martin Wright, who got into a few games with the Argos last season, and then a couple rookies. Trevardo Williams was a big-time player for the University of Connecticut in college, was a 4th-round draft pick in the NFL, and Paul Hazel, another player that the Argos are bringing in that with a lot of talent, played at Western Michigan, not too far from Argoland.
And we go on the interior, coming over from Saskatchewan, Andre Monroe, good, rubbing the belly, and Brian Balke from Hamilton, a huge battle on the inside.
Yeah, and, the Argos, another name that many people are excited to see what he could do this year also is Darryl Wadd, another Canadian, the guy they drafted last year. The Argos are going to have a competition right down the line. Monroe seemed to be a type of guy that just always was in the backfield when he was in Ryder Green, comes over to a trade in Toronto. Brian Bulkey, a veteran player that comes over from the Ticats, missed all of last season and also had experience with the Calgary Stampeders previously.
And as we look at the middle linebacker position, a guy that I'm a big fan of, former Manitoba Bison, and he's got some competition down the middle in the defense for the Argos as well.
Yeah, Thomas Miles, a guy that came in relief of Corey Greenwood. Greenwood got injured later on in the season with a concussion, and Miles did a great job filling in for him. Here's one where the Argonauts have a bit of flexibility of whether they want to go with a Canadian or an American. They have a rookie coming to their system this season from Syracuse University, a player by the name of Marquis Spruill. Spruill could win the job, Miles could win the job, and they could have 2 Canadians on their linebacking group. And, the Argos, their defense, there's going to be a lot of turnover and a lot of battles. Moving on from there, you have those 2 linebacking positions. Brandon Isaac, Keon Raymond, a host of other guys could play the nickel linebacker, halfback, safety. There's a whole lot of different scenarios with the Argos they could have. But Isaac and Raymond both have history playing linebacker. One could shift back to safety. Gerald Brown is a player they added from the Montreal Alouettes, a veteran player that could play all over the field. And then there's the holdovers in those halfback spots in Devin Smith and Travis Hawkins.
Jermaine Gabriel's another one I'm a fan of as well. They brought him back towards the end of last year, but who knows where he'll end up being. And probably the most well-advertised battle for those who might be brand new to the CFL fantasy football game, quarterback for the Ottawa Redblacks.
Henry Burris, Trevor Harris. That's going to be a fun one to watch. An interesting stat is Burris, I don't have the exact number here, but he hasn't missed a game in, I think, about 4 seasons now. And so people that think, when Burris gets hurt, Harris will come in. Henry Burris just doesn't get hurt. He's into his 40s now, and he could play for another 10 years. More reasonably, though, I think, in my mind, and I think you'd agree with me on this, I think that the Red Blacks see this as a bit of a transition year. One last year from Burris before handing off the reins to Trevor Harris.
Yeah, and they have some great future, not only a quarterback, but also the slot back position with some young up-and-comers.
Khalil Payton and Jameel Smith are guys that have been around this program for a couple of years since the inception of the Red Blacks. Obviously, there's first-rounder Jake Hardy, a couple other rookies in Jerron Kreiner and Tyler Shoemaker that are coming to camp. Mo Price obviously leaves in the offseason, so the Red Blacks are going to be looking to replace him. So there's a lot of different names that could fill in that 5th receiver spot.
Defensive end, there's some battles there too.
Yeah, and this is one for the Red Blacks that last season they obviously had Justin Capicotti and Sean Lemon as the ends. Aston Whiteside pretty much has the one side locked down. The opposite side, the Red Blacks might go with another Canadian. They have 3 guys that have been with them for a couple of years. Kalanji Kashama, Connor Williams, and Andrew Marshall. All 3 talented Canadians. they could elect to stay at that. They also have a rookie coming in, an American in that position, a player that comes from Florida Atlantic University named Corey Henry. He has all the measurables, really made a name for himself with the Red Blacks organization, and has been around there himself as a practice roster player, and could be ready for action.
Looking at the defensive backfield, there's also some battles there as well. In a defense that we firmly believe is going to be right up there with the most physical and punishing defenses in the CFL.
You know, it seemed with the Red Blacks that it didn't matter who they put in that defensive backfield. They made plays. Brandon McDonald was the guy that everyone thought he's the best, one of the best defensive backs in the league. The Red Blacks let him go midway through the season last season, and he goes to Calgary, and suddenly there's the big name. There's Abdul Kanay. There's also Jarrell Gavins. And then there's a host of players that just filled in admirably. Forrest Hightower, Brandon Sermons, John Boyette, Jeff Richards, Jermaine Robinson. They bring in Ryan Hines from Edmonton, who's a Canadian. And so the Red Blacks have a whole lot of guys that it's just right finding the right mix. And so at this point, it's just going to be a matter of seeing who steps up at training camp. And that Red Blacks secondary could really be a lot of good players coming out this season.
And last but not least, Montreal Alouettes, and the news that was tweeted out today that the Alouettes have tried to move Rakeem Cato repeatedly over the past week, and obviously the big addition coming from BC at quarterback. What are they going to do, and who do you pick at quarterback for Montreal?
You know, the one that I think is going to be there without a doubt is Kevin Glenn, because I think they want his veteran presence there with the young quarterbacks. The Alouettes, I think they have enough players to make an offense out of all their quarterbacks. There's Vernon Adams, as you mentioned, comes over from BC. Kevin Glenn. Rakeem Cato appears to be on his way out. Not many people are really sure what's going on with Jonathan Crompton. Crompton, who came into last season as the starter for the Alouettes. You don't hear much of what his role is going to be, or if there is going to be a role for him. And then there's the Canadian, Brandon Bridge, who many are hoping can become one of the top players in the CFL and you know, do something that you haven't seen in close to 40 years, a Canadian leading a team to a Grey Cup championship.
Safe to say that defensive line for Montreal and linebacking core, as we get to linebackers in a second, the defensive line, can you ever have too many defensive ends? That's what I really wonder.
Well, you know, and I'd previously mentioned Aaron Laverius. He just can't get into the lineup for the Alouettes because John Bowman just keeps being John Bowman. 19 sacks last year for a guy that at one point of the season it appeared was on his way out of Montreal and potentially out of the CFL. Bowman's back again. I don't see him really giving up that opportunity to Laverius. So Laverius stays in a backup role. Then you go down the line and a name that people are excited to see what he's going to do in the CFL, and someone that's been around the NFL, former Western Ontario Mustang, Vaughn Martin, who takes a Canadian national spot on the defensive tackle, and he's going to be beating out guys like DeQuinn Evans and Michael Clausen that quite possibly could be playing on any defensive line around the CFL. So yeah, you talk about that Alouettes defensive line, and there's going to be guys that should be playing that just aren't going to be playing, and that's not to mention their linebacking group.
Yeah, and finally a head scratcher when you're looking at the linebackers. We're not really even sure why they still have so much talent out of those linebackers. Like, it really doesn't make any sense, and we're left scratching our heads going, which one do you trade? Which do you even release somebody?
Well, and Herb Zurkowski of the Montreal Gazette tweeted out earlier today that he believes that in addition to Cato, other veterans might be on their way out of Montreal. And one name that I think we've talked about off air as a guy that has slipped the last couple of years, maybe isn't the same player, but maybe might be able to find himself a role somewhere in the CFL, and that's Chip Cox.
Yeah, that'll, I would say, be probably one of our bold predictions for this camp, that Chip Cox might get released by Montreal somewhere in training camp. Do you have another bold prediction for yourself?
Well, and on that note, you see the other three guys with the Montreal Alouettes. Bear Woods, who missed most of last season, is on his way back in. Winston Venable, a guy that last season was one of the top tacklers in the league, is back. And don't forget about Kyler Ellsworth, a rookie last season. He filled in Woods' absence and really became a household name, a guy that was flying around everywhere. And one other place that maybe, we've talked about it with other teams, between moving that nickelback linebacker position and safety position, Marco Briette has been around for a number of years. He's a Canadian, obviously, but now with Von Martin taking a Canadian spot on the line, perhaps the Alouettes go with an American. Maybe it is Chip Cox at the safety spot. That'll be something to watch. I'm not predicting that's going to happen, but just that Montreal preseason is going to be something to watch, and who stays and who goes with the Alouettes. And I know for you, one name that you're excited to see this season, and maybe that is a bold prediction, is Mitchell White, potentially leading the CFL in interceptions.
Mitchell White is a guy that I watched last year that I was very excited to see. I think just with his aggression, his speed, how he just doesn't give up. He continually fights for the ball on each and every play. He's going to be a guy, I think, that'll be right up there leading the league in almost every positional category. So as you're getting ready for your fantasy football drafts, we announced that Fantaseh.ca website will be back up and running again very soon. As you're getting all your prep done and you're thinking about who to draft, Mitchell White is a guy that we say will be right up there in almost all categories. And as you're getting ready for your fantasy football season, we are almost ready to blow your minds with the guide of guides.
Yeah, the 2016 Onside CFL Fantasy Football Fantasy Guide will be coming out in the next 10 days. You're going to want to get your hands on this. One that's going to be available at our website, onsidecfl.wordpress.com. You'll be at the link from there. And this is going to be, I know people have asked, is the fantasy toolkit going to be back? This isn't just a toolkit. This isn't just a set of Excel documents and anything like that. This is 200 player previews with projections for stats for the 2016 season. So for your quarterbacks, how many completions they're going to get, how many yards they're going to get throwing, touchdowns, interceptions, all across the board, right through the defense, right to kickers and team defenses. You're going to be able to walk into your 2016 CFL Fantasy Draft and hashtag win your league.
You're going to want to hashtag win your league. Get that trending, get the word out. Follow myself on Twitter at DaveDawson7. Follow Dan at Dan_UK1. He's Dan the Stats Guy. You can follow us at CFL Fantasy FTB as well. Oh, packed show. Cannot wait. Training camp is underway this weekend. Lower your weapons and let's get it on. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.